Our today's speaker is Dr. Umar Sadat. He is one of the prolific researcher and the person who is titled as Hunterian Professor. In 200 years history, he is the first Muslim, first Pakistani, and in 72 years history, first Asian who has been titled as Hunterian Professor. We are so proud of you, sir, for making King Edward Medical University proud of you, as well as the whole Pakistan and the Muslim community to be proud of your achievements. I would like to invite you for your lecture today on research and how its landscape is changing here.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Can you all hear me? सबसे पहले तो मैं डॉक्टर सारा आपका शुक्रिया अदा करता हूँ for your very generous introduction. I'm also really grateful to Professor Mahmoodiya Sahab. He's my teacher. I was his house officer way back in 2002. I think it was South Surgical Ward. He's also a family physician of ours. So I better pay my true thanks to him, and I'm really grateful for all of his support and for all the inspiration that he gave us, to me, myself, as a medical student when I was a house officer. So thank you very much, sir. I'm also really grateful to all the faculty members who are here, and also to the students who have come to listen to what I have to say. मुझे जो टॉपिक दिया गया, that is how we can improve the quality of research in Pakistan. Now, this is a very big topic, a very heavy topic for me to talk about, but what I'm doing is that I'll present you with a bit of background about what the research landscape is in developing countries, and then how do we deal with the different limitations that I see from the literature that the developing countries face. So what I would suggest is that, although this is a view from like 30,000 feet, that I'm going to present to you, but there will be some things that each one of you might take away from and use it, to improve your CVs, also to think about the way, how you can address a research question, or how to do idea generation, and also to maintain quality of your research. So with that, I think we'll just wait for this presentation to load, and then I'll begin my talk. Or at the end of the lecture, I'll be very happy to take your questions. If you feel a bit shy, then just write it on a piece of paper and you can pass it on to us, and I'll be very happy to answer your questions. So this is the title of my talk, Original Research in Pakistani Context and How to ensure the Quality of It. Now, I'm a vascular surgeon by profession, but I've spent almost equal number of years doing research in cardiovascular imaging, and that's what I specialize in. Most of my research is original research, is investigative. I have done some randomized trials, but mostly I'm an investigative researcher. Looking at the pathobiology of atherosclerosis. But here I'm trying to share my views on the topic, and hopefully you will find parts of it beneficial for yourself. So this is a bit of the background about where we are, where we lie as developing nations. Now, the developing nations are densely populated, and if we look at the disease burden, about 90% of the disease burden comes from the developing nations. But if we look at the number of publications that get published in different journals, that's only about 6 to 8% which come from these densely populated countries. So you can clearly see that there is a huge gap in how much the developed nations know about our disease burden, our problems, and this is a disparity that only we can work on. Most of the research that I have seen which has been published from the developing countries, and I'm using the word developing country here, which includes Pakistan and so many other countries like the Middle Eastern and Northern African countries here, we see that they are mostly based on international collaborations. And international collaborations form about more than 50% of these publications. And this kind of shows that the high impact journals normally attract those publications which are collaborative in nature, whereas those publications which are indigenous and done by the authors which are local to a country, they are mostly published in local journals or regional journals, and they're not very high impact. And over many years, over the last 10 to 20 years, we see that there is a lot of stagnation and also a contraction in the scientific activity from these developing countries. And I'll talk about what the reasons for that are. So these are a few graphs here which I will try to explain. So the first one, I'm trying to use the laser pointer so that I can at least show you what I'm talking about. So the first one here, I think what I'll do is I'll use a cursor if I can. So here you can see that MENA, which is the Middle East and North African countries, so that's the abbreviation for them, MENA. So you can see that these countries are basically at the bottom of the curve. And so I don't think you'll be able to see the cursor here because maybe the brightness is a bit too much, but I think you can appreciate the first one here, which is this one, the first graph, and I think I'm showing you with the cursor that MENA, which is the Middle Eastern and North African countries, now you can see it there, that's at the bottom. And you can see that from 1981 to 2013, there's a very steady increase in the number of publications from this group of countries. But if you look at other countries like Turkey, South Korea, USA, they are miles ahead. And then you have countries like Singapore and Norway. Now these countries form a group which are basically research-driven economies. So they have got a policy from the government that they have to drive the research engine. And they are instilling, more than 1% of their GDP to increase the research productivity. And that is showing up on this graph. But you can see the Middle Eastern to North African countries right at the bottom here. But what's more disturbing is the curve of this group of countries going down, which is the indigenous contribution of the authors from these countries. And this shows that the authors from these countries are producing less and less if they are indigenous. But if there's an international collaboration, then that number is increasing when we look at the details of this graph. But if you see that in China and Turkey and South Korea, those countries which are really focusing on driving their economies and also have a very focused research policy, their graphs are basically have plateaued now. They're not increasing, but they're plateaued. You can also see this from the third graph here, that the orange boxes are the contraction in the research activity. And you can see that all these countries are basically contracting. So from Kuwait to Saudi Arabia to UAE to Oman, all these Middle Eastern North African countries, they have basically significantly reduced production of publication, over a number of years. And this is not a snapshot over 1 year, but this is from 1984 to 2012. So this is a really worrying sign that despite of allocating resources, the research productivity is on a decline, and the indigenous activity of the authors from these countries is also on a decline. Unfortunately, Pakistan doesn't show up in this publication, but we are also a developing country, so I wouldn't hesitate to say that we are also forming a similar pattern. However, there's one thing which is quite encouraging that I found yesterday when I was doing some literature search, is that in 2018, the countries with the biggest rise in the research output, Pakistan was at the top of it. And then this was followed by Egypt and then China. Now this was published in Nature, so we have to take these numbers seriously. And then here on the other side, we have got countries like USA, China, UK, so all the G9 countries, you can see them on the other side. Now if we dig deep into these numbers, that why is Pakistan at the top, the editorial board of Nature, they basically said that they don't really know why that is. They were a bit bamboozled to see that Pakistan is producing so many papers. So they are thinking that maybe there are a number of journals which are, of course, regional or local, and they have actually become a part of the big databases. And now they can basically, and they're basically giving us a snapshot of the research productivity. So these journals were not, say, PubMed listed or Embase listed before, but now they are being registered. So that could be one of the reasons. Also, there is the HEC policy that for promotions and to kind of further your careers, you have to produce papers. So I think that is also one of the reasons why in 2018 there was an uptick in the research productivity. The increase in funding and international collaborations, they also say that that could also be one of the reasons for the increase in the productivity. Now, when I looked at PubMed, I wanted to see what journals we are publishing most of the time. No, these are the journals that I was able to see being frequently used. The Journal of College of Physicians and Surgeons of Pakistan, Journal of PMA, and then this online journal, Curious, which seems to be used so frequently, although in the West we have never heard of this journal. So this is an online journal which I think people from Pakistan are using quite heavily. And I think it's an online, and maybe the editorial policies are somewhat relaxed. I'm not sure about it, but this is what I observe, at least from my very generic research of different databases. Now, this is a very important graph here to see, and it shows that as the number of publications is increasing, is the impact factor of those publications also increasing for a country? And we see that all of the countries in the world, as the number of publications increase, the impact factor of those publications decreases. There's only one country which is an exception, which is China. So you can see here, the black line here, the black curve, it shows the total number of publications, which is on an uptick here. And then you see this orange colored curve here, which is the impact factor, which is also increasing. In USA, which is of course the leading country which produces quality research, the number of publications is however decreasing, but the quality of publications is increasing. So when I was looking up all of these papers, what I found was that there were quite a few points which were identified by these different authors, and I have tried to basically mention their perspective here rather than giving you my impression straight away, because you may say that I'm biased in what I'm saying. So I would rather present published research which has already been peer reviewed. And one of the overarching limiting factors which most of these articles have talked about is the lack of sustained support or a policy. So there's a government change or there's a change of administration in a university, and all of a sudden there is a policy change. And that causes an uptick in the productivity of a hospital or a university or a country. But then we are unable to sustain that, and that leads to a decline over time. And you can see the same effect in that graph I showed you early on from Middle East and the North African countries, that there was an uptick for quite a few years, and then something happened that everything has gone downhill since then. So the lack of sustained support is one of the reasons, and the sustained policy as well. Now, the mandatory publications I've alluded to before, and this is a government policy which has been put in place in different countries, and I think this policy exists in Pakistan as well. And what that encourages is quantity over quality, because I'm not sure if there is a guideline about what quality of publication someone has to produce. And what that leads is to just number of publications coming out from a country or from an institute, but the quality of that is lacking, and that really shows that how many of our articles are being cited by different investigators internationally. And I think this is a pretty depressing figure if we look at the number of citations which come from developing countries, that it's almost negligible. The third point is something which has been mentioned to me by different people who come from developing countries, from emerging economies, that there is a culture which doesn't lend support to aspiring academics or students. And it kind of holds back people who are doing PhDs and MDs. And this is a bit of an unhealthy, what I call a Darwinian behavior. I mean, you can be very competitive, that's fine, but you don't want to be competing with your students, If you're a mentor, you need to be thinking differently, and you need to support them and get them across the finish line. And this is something which holds back people in certain places. And I think the model which we can perhaps use to get some guidance from is the model in China. I mean, myself, I'm an adjunct director of Nanjing Institute of Neurology, and I work very closely with Chinese. What they did was in 1980s and 1990s, they attracted a lot of their foreign talent back into the country, although they were holding positions abroad, but they were also holding positions in their own universities as visiting directors or visiting professors. And what that did was that basically fast-tracked the whole process of producing quality research. Now, I'll go into the details of where the barriers are with research, but the idea generation is the biggest barrier, which I think, because if you have got an idea which is basically just a repetition of something that has happened in the past, you will never be able to publish in high-impact journals, and you're basically just reinventing the wheel. So what you need to do is you need to try to fast-track this whole process. So the Chinese model, which is to collaborate and attract your talent which has settled abroad, I think that is one of the ways that the Chinese have worked really well on. And that is one of the reasons which is, you can see in the graph that their productivity is increasing and their impact factor publications are also on an uptick, and that is something which even USA doesn't, cannot manage, at the moment. And this is a quotation which everyone knows about, and this is very much relevant to our mentors, to people who supervise students, that you have to support your students, you have to help them, provide them with the, you need to nurture them. That's the bottom line, because at the end of the day, once there's a high tide, all the boats are going to be lifted, So you have to think about it in a game theory manner, like everyone will get a fair share, of the reward once the whole country is doing well. So you need to look beyond yourself, your personal self, and look at the nation, look at the people around you and those who are basically relying on you as your guide or as your mentor. There are other reasons, which were mentioned in those articles, and that was the regional conflicts and the socio-political instability. And the authors of those articles commented that when Arab Spring happened, that was one of the biggest reasons why there was a downward trajectory of the publications, because of the turmoil in those countries. Similarly, the socio-political instability in those countries. So that was perhaps one of the reasons why those countries which were doing well, they were not doing well after some time. And I'm not saying that that is the case in Pakistan, but there are a few similarities that you can draw from it. That if there is stability, political, economic, social, of course the country is going to do well, and you will have more time to think about things which really matter than things which are, of course, of political nature. So this slide is a bit busy, but I think it kind of encapsulates the research barriers which have been identified by different researchers, and I've also put in a few of those factors which I think are really important. And at the top of the list, you'll see the idea generation and creativity. Now, if you were to ask me that, can I give you a magic solution or a magic pill which will help you to do idea generation, it's almost impossible. It's a matter of time. You have to think about, you have to breathe research, you have to think about research all the time, and then one day you will have perhaps a eureka moment, in which you will have some sort of new ideas coming to you. But if you're just looking at other people's work and trying to imitate or copy other people's research, then I think you will be able to produce the number of papers, but the quality will be lacking. So here I think that collaborative networking with international investigators, I think, can be really helpful. And also people who are faculty, for example, in King Edward, if they were to go abroad and spend a few months in different university hospitals abroad, they can perhaps get a feel of how the things work and how the idea generation works, and they can come back and inspire the generation of researchers here. So idea generation and creativity is one of the biggest barriers which I think is holding the developing countries such as Pakistan. Data integrity is something which I think is really important, because we know that there are quite a few occasions, not only from developing countries, but also on the international stage, in which the data has been questioned because it's been cooked. And that leaves a very bad name for the institution. So whatever you do, make sure that the data is is absolutely robust, it's reliable. Because what happens is that if you do something which is unethical, then it brings a bad name for the faculty of that institution and for the alumni abroad. And what ultimately happens is that that university hospital gets blacklisted. And then those people who are absolutely sincere in their approaches, they are held back from publishing in those good journals. So data integrity and your personal integrity is really important. The awareness of medical statistics and research methodologies is also something which cannot be overemphasized. And I think this is really important because once you have an idea that what research methodology is, then you can basically start designing a research project of your own. And medical statistics, when I graduated way back in 2003, at that time, I did not have much of an idea about medical statistics. But once I started doing my research and I became more familiar with research methodologies, at that time I had an idea that what I was missing before and what was holding me back from coming up with new ideas. Because then you start reflecting on different limitations of your ideas once you have an idea about methodologies. Lack of funding is another huge barrier. And this is a problem not only in the developing countries but also in the developed countries. And we found that in countries like UK and USA, when there was COVID lockdowns, most of the research funding was withdrawn, and that led to a huge decline in the productivity, and people's careers were affected, including mine. The medical students and the PG students here in our country, in the developing countries, I think they need to be given enough of a playground, I would say, in which they can come up with their own ideas, rather than being spoon-fed different ideas. So rather than giving them ideas, let them have their own ideas and then let them develop those ideas. And I think this process takes years to mature. And I think as medical students, if it's possible from the academic side, from the faculty, to give them small projects when they're in their third year or their fourth year, so that they can get a flavor of how to come up with ideas, or at least how to get involved with research at least. And then they can build something on those foundations. The facilities are, of course, not as great, as they are in developed countries, and that is because of the lack of funding. And this is something which, of course, which will overcome with time, I think. The technical support and the inadequate training is also there, and I think this is a matter of time, but hopefully with time, with more technical expertise, which will attract from abroad and also from indigenous expertise, I think this will all be overcome with coding, with artificial intelligence, all these new buzzwords that you hear. I think you need to collaborate with people like computer scientists and basic science people from University of Punjab, for example, and you can overcome these limitations. Now there are three things which I've mentioned here. These are highlighted in red, and I think this is something which I myself was also thinking about when I started my research journey. And one of them is like the fear of rejection by journals, because you think like my idea is not good enough. And this mainly happens because you're not very much familiar about how the editorial policies work, and also you haven't published enough. So there's always this shyness and hesitance towards publishing. But the more you publish, the more you will be able to overcome this fear. Also, there is this uncertainty about which journal you should be focusing on, and sometimes I think we sell our ideas a bit short, where they should be. I've been guilty of publishing in journals which I think were a bit low, at a lower threshold than what I should be publishing in, but it was just that I didn't have enough of a guidance when I was starting my research journey. But I think with good mentors, they can basically guide you that this is a topic which is worthy of this journal. And I think this is where that research culture is so important, that you need to have mentors who have played on the bigger stage, and they can help you navigate these treacherous waters at time. Then there's a lack of culture of publication, and we've talked about this already. This second last point I think is quite important for developing countries, and I'm not saying this is only in Pakistan, but also in other countries. Even USA, I think, is also one of those in which the private practice is quite prevalent. And what that does is the clinicians are basically spending more time in their clinical work and less time they have for academic work. Now, this is perfectly fine, because if you want to be a clinician, that's perfectly okay. But then if you want to be an academic, you need to have more time to come up with ideas, to mentor or supervise your PhD students or your MPhil students. You can't be the best in both of them. There are people who are best at both, but they are almost a rarity these days. And this is because things are so advanced and so super specialized that it's not very easy to be the best at both. Now, this is a point which I think I've touched upon before, and that is that from developing countries, most of the researchers tend to publish in local journals. And I think this is because they think it's easy to get into those journals, and maybe they're selling their ideas a bit short, where they should be otherwise. So I think here I would suggest that you should try to submit your publications to international journals, because at the end of the day, journals like British Medical Journal or Lancet, they also have sub-journals as well, like BMJ case reports. So you can submit something there, and you can try your luck. If your idea is good enough, you might get published there, and they also get calls, for developing countries. So you may well be in luck, if you try to publish in those journals. So don't just focus on regional journals. Try your luck in international journals, and most of the time I would say that it's a matter of luck publishing in these high-impact journals. Now, these journals also have got different editorial policies. For example, Lancet, what they'll do is, and also a journal like New England Journal of Medicine, they basically cater to their own local audience. So if you see the New England Journal of Medicine, you'll see most of the publications are coming from Harvard. And it's because of New England, right? So they are basically catering to the public in Massachusetts, but because the articles are of such high quality, it's a very high impact journal with impact factor of about 60 or 70. Same thing with Lancet or BMJ. But do try your luck in these journals, and hopefully you will get some reviews from the reviewers from those journals, which can improve the quality of your publications. And then you can resubmit your articles somewhere else. So just don't feel shy or feel scared of submitting to these journals. The access to medical journals, I think, is also quite important and crucial because in developing countries, we do not have access to high quality journals and journals which are not that high quality. We can get access to, say, BMJ or Lancet or, say, New England Journal of Medicine, but there's so many hundreds of journals which are there, and they can be a place for where you can publish. But if you're not aware of those journals, if you not have access to those journals, then of course you will not submit to those journals. So I think here it's a matter of investing in getting access to those journals, and I think the government, the HEC, and different universities who have enough funding, I think they can decide on which journals for different specialties are of interest for that institution or for that university. And then this will give you exposure as medical students, as PGs, to read those journals, and perhaps you can come up with new ideas after being inspired that this is an idea which is worth publishing in those journals, which are of international level at least. Now this is the last slide, and I think I'll stop on this slide, and this is the most important one, I think, besides whatever I've said before. And this is because we know that it's very difficult to publish because of lack of funding, because of lack of support, because of lack of adequate mentorship. But there isn't anything stopping you from reaching out to international investigators or being a part of international collaborative framework. And I think here, different professors, who have been to different universities, they can reach out to their colleagues abroad and develop those collaborative networks for randomized control trials or even registries. And this can get you those high impact publications. As far as the basic science collaboration is concerned, that's slightly difficult because, of course, basic science involves lab access, and people would not be very comfortable, getting this human specimens from, say, Pakistan to Germany or to UK or the other way around. So I think here you need to collaborate with local universities, such as the basic science departments in University of Punjab, like genetics or molecular biology, immunology, proteomics, and things like that, because then you can do those high impact publications. But you can only do that if you have an idea. So it all falls down again. Everything goes back to what I mentioned to you in that busy slide, that it's your idea which really matters. And this will only come with time. So you have to keep trying, and you have to keep working hard, and you have to be perseverant, because there's no shortcuts in life. And I think research is one thing at which you have to be persistent, and you have to keep digging at it, and one day you will be able to break those barriers. So I think with that I'll stop. I'll be very happy to discuss any points, and I'm very happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Umar Sadat, for a wonderful lecture and suggestions.